Hello and welcome to another An Old Man Watches, and today I'm going to be talking about Season 1 and 2 of The Tudors, a television series that ran for 4 years. I'm only going to talk about the first 2 seasons in this video. And although it takes its title from the name of the whole dynasty, The Tudors is actually the story of King Henry VIII, who is infamous for his 6 wives and the fact that his lust/love, depending on how you want to look at it, inspired England's secession from the Catholic Church. That's why we have the Church of England, or the Anglican Church. And as the show begins, King Henry is questioning his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, who has only given him a single daughter in all their years of marriage, and is now likely too old to provide any more children. The king has fathered a son, but the boy's illegitimate, a byblow of one of his many affairs. Henry's interest in finding a way out of his marriage increases when the captivating Anne Boleyn returns to England from the French court. She is beautiful, good company, intelligent, and the king is smitten. But the courageous and ambitious Anne refuses to simply become his mistress. She insists that if he wants to be with her, he has to find a way to marry her. Possibly she takes this tack because her sister Mary already became the king's mistress in the past and was quickly discarded once he'd had his fun. Obsessed with Anne and believing she will give him the son he so desperately wants, King Henry begins to actively seek an annulment to his marriage. However, this requires dispensation from the Pope, and there's a big problem. The pontiff is a prisoner of Queen Catherine's nephew, the King of Spain, who, as you might imagine, is not inclined to see his aunt stripped of her marriage and her title. The Pope stalls and prevaricates, trying to basically, wait out King Henry. And the king grows more obsessed with Anne Boleyn and more irate with the failure of his chief advisors to secure his divorce, leading the King of England to consider more and more extreme measures to get what he wants. So The Tudors it's a glossy, well-financed series with a fine cast and generally good production values. As I mentioned, there are 4 seasons in all. This one's just about the first 2, so let's dive in and talk about them. So the first thing that I have to acknowledge is that I don't think we can talk about the show without discussing the fact that it features quite a lot of sex and nudity. Characters are frequently having sex, and when they aren't actually having it, they're often talking about it. Now, this is not entirely inappropriate, it has to be said. Henry VIII was infamously driven by his lust. He had numerous mistresses to go with his 6 wives, divorced one of those wives purely because he didn't find her physically attractive, and, ultimately he took his entire country out of the Catholic Church, triggering seismic changes in the political and religious landscape of Europe, just so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. That has to rate among the most extreme actions someone has taken in order to fill their romantic/sexual desires. And I must say that show's sex and nudity is not as gratuitous as a show like Strike Back, a show which was a program where naked women would literally just kind of be plopped into the background of scenes that had nothing to do with sex or intimacy. It was just like, here's a naked girl, have a look. The Tudors is certainly not shy about its characters' carnal desires, and the sex lives of the characters are a central theme of the show. Depending on who you are, that may be either a strike against it or a selling point, I guess, but it's certainly something to acknowledge. Secondly, Anne Boleyn. As much as The Tudors as a whole is the story of Henry VIII, who, in my opinion, is one of the worst human beings to ever be the King of England, these first 2 seasons are very much the story of Anne Boleyn. Her seduction of Henry, her rise to power, her brief reign as queen, and her ultimate fate are very much the focus of the show. It has to be said that real Anne Boleyn must have been quite the woman to convince King Henry to break with the church that he'd always championed and to set himself against the most powerful countries of Europe in the process. And in this kind of role, you need a tremendous actor. You need someone who can be steely and brave, convincingly intelligent and manipulative, but also vulnerable and empathetic, able to impress the audience with her strengths, but also win their affection. And fortunately for The Tudors, the casting team knocked it out of the park in selecting Natalie Dormer for the role. This was still quite early in her career, so they didn't have an awful lot of credits to go on, but they must have seen something, because they cast her and they got it right. She is tremendous as the woman whose life and love is very much the heart of these 2 seasons, and well worth watching. And finally, we have to acknowledge that while this is a historical drama, and it more or less accurately, covers the major events of the period, this is not a show that is concerned about fidelity to the detail. As long as the broad strokes are right, the creative team here are more than willing to exercise some dramatic license. For instance, they make characters who are composites of multiple real-life people. I suspect this is done to make things easier to follow. Number one, it means fewer characters for the audience to keep track of. And number two, it means fewer characters who all have the same name for the audience to keep track of. A surprisingly limited number of Christian names or first names, there would have been Christian names at the time, obviously, were in use in England during this period. There were lots of people named Catherine or Anne or Thomas or Henry. Even with the pruning that even with the pruning that they've done in this show, we still have Thomas Cranmer, Thomas Cromwell, Thomas Wolsey, and Thomas More as fairly significant characters. Most of those characters ended up getting referred to by their surname, which helps keep track of them. But similarly, there are two Marys. Rather than have a third Mary, who was a sister of the king, they merge her with another of his sisters, Margaret, and share kind of story elements of those two people into one character. So a lot of the detail has been amended for TV. On the flip side, the show does get things like Henry's religious beliefs more or less right. It does depict the fact that he left the Catholic Church not because he disagreed with Catholic practices or dogma. He was not in any way a reformer in that sense, but because he wanted a divorce that the Pope refused to give him, and leaving the church was his way to seize the power to get the divorce. In its broad strokes, it is correct. It's just worthwhile to keep in mind that this is a show which is more about being entertainment than about being meticulously accurate. It is a historical drama with the emphasis on drama. So that's the first two seasons of The Tudors. Overall, I think if you have an interest in the period and you don't mind the kind of more raunchy material that it's going to have, and you want to see a fantastic performance from Natalie Dormer, then it's really worth checking out. If those things don't appeal, then, well, don't watch it, I guess. Next time, something completely different. The 1975 Greek horror film Land of the Minotaur, starring two men who probably wish they weren't involved in the product. But that's next time. In the meantime, thanks for watching this one, and I hope you enjoyed it.